Yes, I think we shall just go on and start for today. So welcome to everyone. It was a very good and interesting day yesterday, learning about the different generations and what is gifts for their generation and what is some challenges. And today we will continue with speaking about how we can communicate better between the generations. Janice, can I ask you to pray for us for today?
I'd be glad to.
Thank you.
Father, we thank you so much for the rich teaching that we're receiving, Lord, and I pray that you will use it in our lives as we desire to communicate well with whoever is at our base or our location. And we thank you for our speaker, Lord. We ask you to bless her, to protect our internet, and to just bless our day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Angelique, I give it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Boodle. So nice to be with you again today. And as we were talking together after the meeting with the small team, we said sometimes it's maybe difficult to ask questions or to talk about generations or to say something about another generation to a person, because we all belong to a generation. And when you share something about maybe a weakness you see in a generation, it can touch you because it's almost that it's touching you personally. And it's good to be aware of that. As we share, we want to have a safe environment, and it's not by talking about a generation that we also pointing towards a specific person. Because although you're part of a generation, you're also unique. And as we are describing the generation, we generalize everything. And of course, every person is different. And we hope that the more time we spend with Jesus, the more we will be like Jesus and reflect him. No matter from which generation we are. And it's important to know. But it's also important to realize that every generation has strong and healthy characteristics, and maybe more weaker things. For example, my generation, I'm Generation X, we are actually the strongest generation when it comes to resilience. And so that's good to know, and which doesn't mean that every Gen X person has a strong resilience. But within the generation, there's a lot of resilience. And that is an opportunity for younger generations to learn from that, to talk about it. How come that your generation, how do you cope with things in life? But the weak point from my generation, at least that's what I see, is that in my generation, there's so much divorce. I grew up as a pastor's kid, so all of my friends when I was young, in my teens and my 20s, were like Christians. And when I look to them now, I think over 50% of my friends have divorced, even Christians. And so our generation didn't set a good example for younger generations. And in younger generations, you see they are hesitant to lifelong commitments. And that is actually somehow the bad fruit of the example that our generation gave. So it's good for every generation to be aware of what are the strong things and what are the more weaker things in our generation, and things that we need to work on, or maybe even pray for, or even repent from as a generation. And so every generation has those things, and it's important to look through the lens of the Bible. So before we start, I think it is a good idea. Maybe you can shoot some words in the chat, like what stood out for you yesterday, what you heard. Just throw something out in the chat, and let's see what you remember from it, or what stood out for you. Gen Z being spiritually aware in a way like to other. Yeah, Gen Z looks for authenticity. Yeah, Gen Z is a label generation. Yes. Gen Z being sensitive, seeing the felt needs that Gen Z have. I love how you talked about each generation had a way to be evangelized and to disciple. We are going to look at it and to like this more closely in my evangelism team. Well, that's great. Yeah, that's the idea, to put it into action. Thoughts about why so many labels only one child and the desire for them to be perfect. Gen Z labeling actually seems to make them unhappy. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, those that had labels are more unhappy. Yeah. Internet in Egypt is not so good. Oh, sorry. The link between Gen Z not feeling part of the world and the gender confusion. Yes, yes. I feel old being a Gen X. Yeah, especially now Generation Alpha is starting, and after that, another generation. Yeah. Well, thank you for putting that in the chat. I'll share my screen and yes, and we'll continue. Well, if you have questions about yesterday teaching, then you can send it to member carry questions, or you can email me even if you have questions after today. I'll try to answer it. One question came in about the silent generation question. I didn't go into that for detail. The one person asked, can you give me some more details about the silent generation? So I will email that after next week. So I'll make sure I'll follow that up. Well, today we're going to talk about cross-generational communication. And as I was diving into it, it got me excited again. And I thought, oh, there's so much that reminded me to be aware of. And that is so helpful if you are just aware of certain things. And it's so good to always, when you communicate, especially in teams where are different generations together, when you work together, that you have are intentionally communicating. That is so helpful. And I hope today will give you some more tools to be even more intentionally, but also have fruitful communication when you communicate with teams or with another person, someone from a younger generation or someone from an older generation. We'll look at the different generations and the different styles of communication that they use. And because different generations communicate in a different way. And before I'll dive into that, we'll go in a breakout room for a short while, just to talk about what do you think is a strong point in the communication. And then we'll look to the 4 different generations that we be talking about yesterday as well. So what is strong in the communication of a baby boomer, or from a Generation X, or a millennial, or a Generation Z? Or what do you think is more of a weakness in the communication of one of those generations? And as you experience, we probably all work in teams. Where does most miscommunication take place? What causes the miscommunication between the generations? And we'll go in groups of 4 for 15 minutes just to talk and see what are the things that you see that are strong, what are maybe weaknesses in communication, and what causes the miscommunication between the generations. So let's go into breakout rooms for 15 minutes. Yeah, I think most of you are back. I hope you had a good talk in the breakout rooms about the strengths and the weaknesses of communication, and also found some reasons of miscommunication. And I'm wondering if you want to put those reasons into Menti. I don't know if you're used to work with Menti. I'll show it. And do you see the Menti? Yes. So when you go to menti.com and you use the code 77843 3723. And if you can type in some reasons that you talked about for miscommunication, reasons for miscommunications between generations. And then if everything works well, they will pop up on the screen. Different worldviews. Some aren't from generations, but because of different personalities and preferences. Yeah, so true. Different expectations of clear communication. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Different buzzwords. Yeah, adventure might be positive to one gen, but scary to another. Yes, that's the big difference between the millennials who like adventure and Gen Z. Inefficiency of email and text to communicate details clearly. Yeah, no body language, voice inflections. Yeah. Using different terminology. Yeah. Language is always developing. It's so good to know what language do different generations speak. For example, we like to use the word evangelize, and Gen Z likes the word to share faith. So there's some words that might be interesting to us Gen Z. What would their preference be in the words? Lack of experience, yes. Pride, can't keep up with their technology, yeah. Skills in technology, yeah. An ability to multitask. Yes, all great things that you came up with and that you've talked about. Well, also communication, it's good to look at communication through the lens of the Bible. And let's go to, when I was preparing this, I was looking at the values, because of course also the values describe something about communication, and we are YWAM, so I thought it's good to look at value 18, communicate with integrity. And YWAM affirms that everything exists because God communicates. Therefore, YWAM is committed to truthful, accurate, timely, and relevant communication. We believe good communication is essential for strong relationships, healthy families and communities, and effective ministry. And I thought this is so good described. And when you go to the values of YWAM, you see a lot of Bible verses that go with that value. And there was one, I think, there's two that I picked out to start with when we talk about communicating. And it's Zechariah 8, verse 16 and to 17. These are the things you are to do. Speak the truth to each other and render true and sound judgment in your courts. Do not plot evil against each other and do not love to swear falsely. Thought this is so true. It says speak the truth to each other. So it is about talking the truth, and render true and sound judgment in your courts. So it has to do something also with judgment and honesty. So it's not only giving compliments when they are not in place or not correcting someone, but do it in a right way. So I think this is a very good verse for that. And Colossians 4, verse 6. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And when I looked at this verse, I liked seasoned with salt. So salt is a little, it adds flavor. And it doesn't say sweet as honey, but it says seasoned with salt. So there can be a little bit salt in your conversations, but let it always be full of grace. And I think that is something that is important to know. And the Bible teaches us so much about communication and communication skills and our attitudes. So that is good to know. Well, we'll dive in the different generations again and see how the different generations communicate. And we'll start with the baby boomers. And yeah, we have some baby boomers with us, so maybe you recognize their way of communication. Well, baby boomers prefer face-to-face communication, and when it comes to feedback, they don't appreciate feedback. They started to embrace modern digital technology. That is something that started. We talked about that yesterday also a bit. And when you look on social media, they would be most likely on Facebook and on LinkedIn. Those are the platforms where most baby boomers are. They're not so much on TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat yet. Maybe some do. If they want to reach the younger generation, if you want to connect with younger generation, those are the platforms. But if you're mainly reaching your own generation, then baby boomers would probably be on Facebook and LinkedIn. They use body language to communicate, and they speak in an open and direct style. And so they're clearly understood. They answer questions thoroughly and expect to be pressed for details. They like details, they like a detailed communication, and they like to read a lot about that as well. And also in communicating, they can add a lot of details to it. So they use a broad communication. They avoid controlling and manipulative language. That's what they don't like. But they do like clear communication. And they present options to show flexibility in your thinking. So when you talk to them, when they communicate, they always like to share more options to communicate. And it's not like only one direction or one thing that they want to push forward. Then when we go to Generation X, they prefer email communication. So this is a different already, as baby boomers preferred face-to-face communication. Generation X prefers email communication. And when it comes to feedback, you see that baby boomers didn't appreciate feedback, but Generation X will ask for feedback. So there's a change in communicating between those two generations coming. Generation X likes feedback. As baby boomers were starting to embrace the technology, Generation X is overall comfortable with technology and using technology. Their social media preferences are also Facebook, but Twitter. They do like Twitter as well, Generation X. They also like open and honest communication. That is important for Generation X. And they tend to be independent and self-sufficient. So they won't ask so much when you are with them in a team. They try to also be independent and self-sufficient. So they ask little questions or help. They try to do a lot on their own and on themselves. As we talked about this generation yesterday, where the individualism was coming in these generations, you see that also in their communication. They prefer receiving and using short and brief messages. So the communication has to be shorter, as the baby boomers liked a lot of details, and they like short communication and brief messages as opposite to lengthy ones. This generation serves as a bridge between baby boomers and millennials when it comes to communication. And they like to use forms of communication that are also in between the two generations. Generation X is closer, let me see, I'm just checking no, this is what I wanted to share about this. So they bridge between the different communication styles between baby boomers and millennials, because they communicate in a very different way. Because when it comes to Generation Y, or the millennials, they prefer email as well, but actually they also prefer text messages. That could be, of course, also WhatsApp or Messenger, but they like to use text messages. When it comes to feedback, they say, I want feedback whenever I ask for it, which will be frequently. They like frequent feedback. And this is actually the first digital native generation. We talked about that yesterday as well. So they are a lot communicating through social media, but also through technology. And that is what their preference is. And they will be, when you look to social media preferences, they are not loyal to any particular social media outlet. So they can be everywhere. They can be on LinkedIn, they can be on Twitter, they can be on Facebook, they can be on Instagram, Snapchat, wherever. They just use the social media that they like, they prefer, or they switch between different social media channels, and just is where their friends are, that's what they will use. When it comes to communicating, for them as well, keep it brief but meaningful. So short but meaningful. They like meaningful communication. They like details, but not as with the baby boomers. They like details which ends in long written statements because they like the email or the long discussions. They like details, but short. And they choose the best medium for communication. So they just choose whatever is meaningful for them or whatever fits to the kind of meeting. So they like face-to-face meetings sometimes when it is appropriate. And they like Zoom calls or online calls when that is appropriate. So they, if you want to reach the younger generation where they are, and they are a lot at home as well, the millennials, then with using them to communicate with them with the phone would be must work the best, actually, because they like to be on their phones, but they don't like to have phone calls. They don't like to use the phone. And this is really different than the generations before who like to be on the phone, make long phone calls. This generation doesn't like phone calls. They like prefer text. And this is something that we found out in school. I trained social workers, and of course, when you're social worker, you have to make a lot of phone calls. So we had even a lesson included in our communication lessons that was making a phone call, and then they had to practice making a phone call and do with another person and pretend that they were making a phone call and just practice making a phone call. Well, it is interesting if you have millennials around or Gen Z to ask them if they make phone calls, and just ordinary phone calls, so not FaceTime calling, things like that, video calls, but phone calls. And most of the time they don't do it, especially not if they have to make business phone calls. It gives them a lot of nerves to do that, and they don't like to do it. They really have to be trained sometimes or practice and get the courage to do that. So they don't use it. Millennials also have the 24/7 communication style. They are always using communication, and they have non-traditional schedules, and they're becoming more common on the workplace as well, and having non-traditional schedules. They like to work from home, which they've done a lot now during COVID. So they can send out emails in the evening or text messages to colleagues in the evening, and then not during daytime. So they are keep on communication after the 9 to 5 mentality. They tell the truth. They can be direct. And they avoid corporate speak. They don't like speaking for someone else or speaking because everybody thinks that way. They like to have the truth spoken. And that is something that is important. They like words. They don't like words and phrases that sound like they are made or written by someone else, but they really like to be honest from the person that sends them. 78% said that collaborating with colleagues on their mobile devices is important. They want to have the phone numbers of their colleagues, and then it's collaborating will be by sending messages, so it's not calling. And 90% found mobile messaging to be an effective way to communicate at work. So they use their mobile phones for communication at work. So it's not that the mobile phone is in their bag when they are at work, but it's constantly right beside them, and they will use it also to communicate with their colleagues. So that is something that is really changing through the generations, and we'll see that that will also increase when we go to Generation Z. Well, most millennials are already digital natives, and a study showed that with millennials, 92% of millennials own a smartphone, and I think that is almost worldwide, that millennials own smartphones, and that gives them access to other people to easily communicate. And they text or message through online apps all the time instead of calling on the phone. And that has a huge impact also on the preferences of communicating. And another study showed that the majority of respondents, when it comes to millennials, they don't even answer a phone call because it is time consuming. And you see, if they don't see the number or the name and they get a phone call, then often they won't even answer the phone call. As generations before, they would probably politely just pick up the phone, answer the phone, and see who is calling. Even if you don't know the number or if you don't see the number, you will answer the phone. With millennials, they won't even answer the phone. So that is something that is really, really different. And you see also that millennials often avoid face-to-face interactions. They prefer to use online messaging software. Because they use online, they prefer online software to communicate with their boss, with the leader, or co-workers. Of course, in YWAM, I think it's different because YWAM is very relational and almost family. So I think we do like a lot of face-to-face communication more than the millennials like in the workplace. Is the best way actually to communicate with millennials is reaching them through digital messaging apps. So if you really want to reach them, don't write long emails, but send them a WhatsApp, send them a message through Messenger or whatever tool you're using, a message over the phone or computer. And I'm just wondering how much this is also influencing our communication in YWAM. A lot of bases still send out information to all their staff by email, some by long emails, and there are some locations that are introducing more apps to use with short messages that is actually the preference of the millennials and Gen Z to communicate. So that's something to think about when we'll look at the communication. Well, a big difference when we switch to Generation Z is that I said already millennials prefer communicating via text, and Gen Z, they like to communicate through images. They like to communicate through images. We'll go to Gen Z. They also like written communication, but actually they like in-person meetings in a workplace. So that is a switch again to in-person meetings. As the generation millennials like the online and through text messages and not in-person meetings, is Gen Z a generation again that likes in-person meetings when it comes to meeting in teams and workplace and where you're part of, where you work together, and that you meet actually face-to-face and in person. They do like written communication, but it stands out that they prefer to communicate with images. And yesterday we already talked about their short attention span from this generation. So they like to communicate, they call it snack media. They like to communicate in bite sizes, very short, punchy headlines or razor-sharp text that resonates better than lengthy dunks of words. I don't know if you've ever received a message from someone from another generation and you write a long text message because you want to share quite some information. And then when you receive back from a Gen Zer, you receive maybe 5 text messages with all 2 or 3 sentences, very short, of 5 words, and another 5 words message, and another 5 words, and you see like 5 or 6 messages coming in from a Gen Zer with all short text. And for me, I'm Gen X, I would just compile it in one message. But that's the difference between the generations. So I would choose for one long WhatsApp message, and they would choose for 5 shorter messages. Well, when it comes to feedback, they like regular and constructive feedback. Actually, 60% of Gen Z expects multiple touch points with their supervisors weekly or even daily. They really like to hear feedback. And what I said, at least weekly and even daily. So they are really looking for feedback. And I don't mean only like negative feedback, you can improve this, you can improve that, but also feedback, okay, I saw you doing this, that is really great. So it's also like the compliment feedback, but they want to be seen and they want to do things right, what we shared yesterday. They don't want to make mistakes, they want to do things really well. So that is why they want to hear feedback, so that they are sure that they're doing things well. So for them, feedback and constructive feedback on an almost daily basis is very, very important. Another thing is that they expect quick responses. So if they send you a question on WhatsApp, they expect a very fast response. It doesn't say that you have to do that, but it's something that is their expectation. So if you're not doing that, or you don't want that to be the norm in your team, you have to talk about expectations. So we'll come back to that later, but this is what they expect. Social media preferences for them is Instagram and Snapchat. That's where they are a lot. And beside that, I think TikTok could be something that they are on as well. Their communication is often very casual. They like casual communication. They like to communicate in a personal and in a relatable way. They like to have a good relationships, but also like a relatable way on how they communicate. What I would say with casual, they treat a lot of people like equals, and they don't expect that the age gap between them and the previous generation, that there is a form of disrespect. But sometimes, because they treat everyone equal, for older generation, it can feel like they are not respected. That's in the way they communicate. That is what I said. They're a lot on internet, and because they're internet, and on internet everybody seems to be equal, that is something that that you see in them as well, that they also approach everyone on an equal level, which is sometimes not a feeling as respect by the older generation. If you don't communicate in 5 words and a big picture, you will not reach this generation. And they like to communicate in pictures. And this is not only to do like in person, personal conversation, but this is also when it comes to public relations, promoting DTSs. What do you put on the website? How do you communicate to this generation? If you want to evangelize or want to reach them, you make a flyer or whatever. Don't put a lot of words on it. Put pictures on it and maybe only 5 words. So they, in one look, they want to see what you are meaning, what you are sharing, what you want to communicate. So that is important. Don't use a lot of text, use pictures. Rather text than talk on the phone. They like to send messages again and not talk on the phone. But 39% say that one-on-one communication is the most effective way to reach them. So you have to find a balance here. They like text, but if you really want to reach them, it's good to also plan one-on-ones with them, because they do appreciated the one-on-one communication. They do like authenticity, and authenticity, honesty, and transparency. That is something where we were talking about yesterday as well, that it is important for them to have this authentic communication. When we look to communication and communication differences, so if you've heard those differences, can you maybe put in the chat what stands out to you the most? What surprised you maybe? What you heard from the different generations and the different communication styles, the different ways of communication that they like? What stood out for you? Did you say, oh, that surprised me, I didn't expect that? Can you maybe add something into the chat? Millennials use a lot of voice messages, yeah? Especially now, I receive a lot of voice messages as well. I think it saves time because you don't have to type in WhatsApp. You just talk it and then you receive voice messages. Yeah. Each generation values honesty. Yes. Gen Z's approaching leadership as equal doesn't mean disrespect. No. It can feel like disrespect, but they don't mean it like disrespect. And it's interesting if you feel like disrespected sometimes by younger generations, to start a conversation either on respect, like what do they assume that respect is, and what is your interpretation of respect? Because sometimes we do misinterpret a word because different generations interpret a word in a different way. So that is interesting to have this conversation. Feedback is good to know. Yeah. Face-to-face, Gen Z is good to know. Important to give positive feedback also. Yes, it is really important to give positive feedback. And sometimes we do forget that. I don't know if that is in every culture. I know American cultures is more of an affirming culture. They make a lot of compliments, but the European culture is often not so affirming. We almost only give comments if we see something that is going wrong. But it's also so good to give affirming feedback and share the positive things that you see when someone from Gen Z is in your teams and is doing things and is leading for the first time or co-leading, that you give also affirming feedback. It's not my experience that millennials and Gen Zs ask for feedback, but they expect positive feedback, okay? Be like Gen Y, although baby boomer. Yeah, that could be, yeah. Now I understand why I write a long WhatsApp and the reply is short. Yes. And then there's a difference with the silent generation. That's always what my kids tell me. They then sometimes my father, he's from the silent generation. He asks them a question by WhatsApp, and I think that's great. That the grandfather in his 80s is WhatsApping with his grandchildren, and then they say something, and they say he never replies. And they expect that he only said thank you or something, some reply on when they WhatsApp him, or sometimes they send him for his birthday, happy birthday, grandpa, and then he doesn't reply. He said, I don't even know if he I saw you read it, but yeah, he never replied. Because in WhatsApp, it's kind of the custom that you keep on replying. And that's something that silent generation, maybe, well, even my dad is not doing a lot. So yeah, he thinks, okay, I received the message, it's fine. So we've all different ways and not spoken ways of communication, but customs, yeah. But it's good to know more about the different generations. Yeah, we'll dive into to the feedback, and I think when we'll do that later this afternoon. Of course, this is also generalized about the feedback. I do think they like feedback, But what I observed is that also generalized that in YWAM we don't use feedback so often. It's not so common to give feedback yet. I hope that will change. And then sometimes when a Gen Zer or millennial enters, maybe they find it difficult to ask for feedback because they feel there is not this feedback culture. When they have studied, like for a profession, they probably learned a lot on asking feedback and receiving feedback, because nowadays it's very common in education that they learn evaluation and feedback. But we do not do this in a very, I think, structural way. We do evaluate, of course, DTSs, and we evaluate outreaches, but that is different than really giving feedback on someone's personal development and look into the person. And maybe, yeah, there could be different reasons why they don't ask it. And expect positive feedback. That is something that Gen Z does struggle with when they receive negative feedback, because yesterday I shared for Gen Z, they have a very good relationship with their parents, almost a friendship. And the parents have protected them for a lot of things, and they've got all kind of compliments from their parents. And then when they start in school or in a workplace and they receive, like, the first time a negative feedback, they're almost shocked, like, oh, what is happening to me? Someone is not happy with me. What is happening? So for them, sometimes that is also they have to learn to cope with that. It's something with this generation as well. But at the other side, they want to do it really well. They don't want to make mistakes. And that's probably also where this positive feedback comes from. They really, almost need this encouragement. But if you, of course, feedback is not only about telling what is not well. So there has to be a balance between, like, the positive feedback and the negative feedback. But they do want to have feedback, but they're also sensitive for the negative feedback. So that is something that is true. What I've observed as well when I saw young Gen Zers going on an internship, and they got feedback for the first time. They were like, I don't know if I want to stay in this place because they have all this feedback for me. And well, I said, you need to develop, you need to grow into your role as a social worker, and you're not there yet. So the only way you can become better and you become professional is by receiving feedback, and look into yourself and evaluate, and then improve the things, how you're doing. Sometimes for them, because they are so much protected by the parents, it is difficult for them to receive it. And yet they want to have that. So that is kind of, somehow it seems like a contradiction. Yeah. But you see, the communication is developing, and what I shared already, also our language is developing. And I think I think that's almost in every culture, that language is developing. And before we called, this generation has like the street language, and then the street language became almost the ordinary language. And so language is developing. What I mentioned, for us, it's very normal to talk about evangelism. And then they say, no, we would prefer to use sharing faith. So it's a little different, but it's about the same. And it's interesting when you have Gen Z at your location to just somehow maybe talk a little bit about, okay, what are words that we are using that you're not using? What is the language that I speak? So it is interesting to just curious to talk with them about that. What could be more preferable terms using? And it's maybe not so important in your conversations, but if you want to recruit Gen Z for your location, or recruit young people for your DTS, then it is important to use the language that Gen Z is using. And then it's important to dive a little bit more deeper into that. As I was preparing, and I thought about communication and what the Bible is saying, and I thought, what if we have the fruit of the Spirit in each one of us, in all of us, and the fruit of our Spirit is reflected in all of our communication, and we see the fruit of our Spirit, it is love. If in all of our communication will reflect the love of God, we speak words with love, and we do love the person that we're communicating with, and that would be wonderful. I think if you have so much love in all your communication, you will break through every barrier that a person has, whether it's from an older generation or if it's from a younger generation. I think it is so important. And what if we could communicate with joy and the joy of the Lord? And even if it's in sad times, not that we will just be overjoyed with sad circumstances, but even if the conversation is more serious, that we still carry somehow the joy of the Lord in our hearts into the conversations, and that we will bring peace that will be at peace ourselves when we start conversations and communication, and that will just show the peace of God in the communication. Patience. Oh, that's something that we often need. It depends on the communication and on the person, but sometimes we really need God's patience when we want to communicate with others. I think this is so, so important. Kindness. How many people are hurt by words that were not spoken with kindness, or conversations that were not spoken with kindness, and when there was not this feeling of kindness in the communication. So also that one is so rich. Goodness. And I think that is goodness. It doesn't mean only saying good things, and also in feedback. I think the main thing from feedback is that you want to see the other person flourish, that you want to see the other person grow, that you see the other person develop in different competencies or in leadership. And feedback is not because you are irritated that you'll just give the feedback, but it is out of goodness that you share feedback. So it's a lot about attitude and the feedback and where you use feedback for. It's not just like an outlet for your frustration on a person. Then it's not actually good feedback. But I won't go into that now, but I will look in those fruit of the Spirit. And I think it's so important to be aware of it, that all the words we speak are full of faithfulness, and that the words that we speak are full of gentleness and also self-control. I don't think it's here without a reason. It's so important to have self-control when we communicate with others. And sometimes self-control is when you receive an email and you are kind of upset and you want to immediately write an email back. I don't know if you have that sometimes. I do have that sometimes. And you type an email and you think, oh, I'm going to write this and that to that person. And then it's a little bit out of your self-control because it's full with anger. And then self-control is not pushing the button send, but just keep it there and let it be there for maybe another day till you are at peace again. And then just read through it and maybe reread it, and then add the peace, the patience, the kindness, the goodness, the faithfulness, and the gentleness into your email. And it is good that you have honest and truth in your conversations, but it has to do with what words you say. And one time heard a person say, he said that it doesn't say that when what I say is right, that God is on my side. And I think that all has to do with how we express the things we say, because we might be right in what we are communicating, but then God is not on our side if we don't choose the words carefully, and if we don't add faithfulness and love and peace to the words that we say. So sometimes we do need self-control, and when it comes to communication. And then, of course, from 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, Love doesn't envy. Love does not boast. Love is not proud. Love is not rude. Love is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps record, or it doesn't keep, record of wrong. It doesn't delight in evil. It rejoices with the truth, always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. I think that is, and it never fails. I think it is so important. It's one of the most important things when it comes to communications. And I think it's so important to be aware of the impact of communication because words have so much power, and it doesn't matter whether you communicate with an older generation or a younger generation. It's always important to be so much aware on how you speak, what words you use, how you formulate, and of course the informal communication. And when there's no tension, when it's just with friends, it is different. But when you communicate in a team, when you want to try to solve problems, when you are mentoring or coaching someone, and you are in a different role, and it's more like an official communication, it's so important to prepare yourself on communication and to be aware of the impact that you have when you communicate with other persons. And yeah, that is something that I really want to share, the importance of that. Is there maybe, I'm just wondering, someone of you that said, oh, I have communicated one time with a person from an older or a younger generation, and it went totally wrong. We really talked on a different level and we didn't understand each other, or I wanted to explain something, but I probably used words that the other person didn't understand. And is there someone that says, oh yeah, I've that experience and I have the courage to share it?
Yeah, I was actually just sharing with the group I was with as well, but I'm very excited about this topic specifically today because I have a team with the youngest is 23 and the oldest is 68. So we are quite diverse. But we've been having issues with communication in the sense that I think I'm communicating. Like for example, last week we said, let's process the teaching together. Here are 3 questions. Everybody come prepared next Tuesday. So that was said in the team meeting, and I wrote the minutes. And then yesterday we had the meeting that we were going to process together. And then there were a few people who said, "Oh, were we supposed to do that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, remember we talked about it last week, and it was also in the minutes." And they were like, "Oh yeah, we talked about it vaguely, but we didn't know we were supposed to do anything." And I was like, "How? How is this possible?" So we agreed that tomorrow we will come again. We have our team meeting, and then we will talk about how can we improve our communication, or what do I need to do, or maybe there's a listening problem, maybe there's a communication problem. So we're actually really in the middle of this. And I also realized there's different backgrounds, different cultures. Some of us have never worked in a normal working environment, so coming to a meeting prepared is not necessarily a normal thing, so that's also maybe has something to do with it. But this is of course not the first time, but we've been looking at different things. How can we improve it? But we haven't come to the conclusion yet.
Yes, and was it then mainly the younger generation that forgot to prepare themselves?
Yes.
And do you think this younger generation is really reading the minutes?
No, they said also we're not reading the minutes. And I don't necessarily mind so much. For me, the minutes is more a backup, If you remember, like we're supposed to do something, but we don't remember what, let's check the minutes, So I see it more as a backup. But somebody even suggested, hey, but what about if you send us every day messages about what we're supposed to do? And I was like, but you're grown-ups. That would be so, like, in my mind, if my leader would send me a list of everything I'm supposed to do that I already know what I'm supposed to be doing, I would find it very belittling. But they said, you just need to say, tomorrow you are expected to do this, and otherwise there's going to be consequences. And I was like, yeah, but I don't want to be that kind of leader. So that was very interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting to talk about expectations, and also it is a different generation. They really like that, and I think if you want them to come prepared just a couple hours before, or the day before, if you would have sent a reminder with WhatsApp, don't forget to come prepared tomorrow to the meeting. That would be really helpful for them, because they are not checking emails. Currently, I'm leading the youth work in our church, and we have a lot of entered some younger generation, and I used to communicate by email about like our meetings and things like that, and I found out they never read it, but the older do. So now often I do send an email, and I do like a short version of it in the WhatsApp, and sometimes not even in the group WhatsApp, but if I want to reach the younger ones, because they already skip the group WhatsApp often. So I send them like a personal WhatsApp. Oh, you didn't respond yet to this, or don't forget that. And I'll just send them a short message, private message, and I see that works. And but sometimes it doesn't work for the older generation. Yeah, so it is talking about it that really helps. And what overall I experienced I led also several teams in when I worked as a teacher, so managing teams, and it often happened there as well. I thought it was communicated. I knew it was communicated, and people were like, "Huh? Did we talk about this?" Yes, we did, but it seemed like when you are a leader, you thought about it before the meeting, you have planned to talk about it, so it's so much in your head, and you share it. But for them, sometimes it's new, and they don't remember it because, you know why you want to do it, why this is the question, everything behind. So it could help to talk about the reason why you want to do it, so that everybody sees, oh, this is really important for us, why we do it. And it's always communicate and repeat, communicate and repeat, communicate and repeat when in teams. And sometimes it almost feels like, am I sharing this again? And then some person is looking at if you're sharing it for the first time. And that comes with leadership. I don't know if some of you recognize it, but it's what I experience. It's repeating. Yeah. But thank you for sharing, Annemieke. Yeah, I see the struggle. And I think that's why actually YWAM Amsterdam went to workplace. They have like this new, more based on Facebook kind of how they communicate with smaller messages and posts, and which almost looks like blogs or whatever. And I think that is really a tool that the younger generation, especially millennials and Gen Z, really appreciate, and more than emails. Is there someone else that has an experience similar or a little different from Annemieke that can share?
Well, I have a question maybe that piggybacks on Annemiek's situation, and it could possibly be something that many of us are thinking. And it's just kind of this thing of like, okay, so, we can understand how younger generation is functioning in regards to communication, and we can look at the older generations and everything. But so where is the line, I guess, of expectation where we would try to encourage younger people? Like Annemieke said, you've got people who've not ever been in a regular work situation, so they don't even understand what it means to come prepared to a meeting or what that could look like. So where is that line of either expecting your younger people to kind of pull up their, bootstraps, if you will, and say, okay, we need you to do this, this, and this to come prepared to meetings or whatever. And that could come with a set of training or whatever. But if it's okay, every new staff that comes in, they go through this training and these are the expectations, or where do we then need to kind of also come down and say, okay, I've got to over communicate. I've got to send those messages. You know, is it an accommodation solely of the younger generation by the older generation, or where is that like meeting place in the center somehow?
Yeah, I do see a big difference between people coming on staff that have done like a professional education or have been working in a job, than that young people that come straight from high school, have never had any experience, working experience, and then jumping into YWAM, and their work ethic seems to be so different, and also what they can carry. And yeah, actually, it is to us, or the locations, then to give them the proper training to develop into some more of a person with the right identity or the work ethic, so that when they leave YWAM, actually, that they've learned a lot when it's about like what you would otherwise learn in the workplace. But maybe it already starts with the onboarding of staff, that there starts to be, okay, what is the expectations, become something, oh, I'm a volunteer, I'm just here, you know, I'll do when I feel like it. And of course, that's not what we want. But sometimes it's already then starting talking about expectations, but also talking about this generation really wants to develop. So what are the goals? Where do you want to go? How can we help you to develop? What are the things that you need to develop? What skills or what competencies are you lacking? And how can we then help you to develop that? And maybe one person would be more open to that than another person. Of course, that is, you always have, that's what you have in any job or any education. But it is good to talk about that, and to have a conversation about expectations, and then try to have a really open conversation and honest conversation, because sometimes Gen Zs, they know the answer, but they want to give the right answer because they have like also this fear of failure. So there needs to be trust, because otherwise they will give you the answer that you expect from them, and that they think you expect from them, but it would not always be the right answer. And although they like authenticity and honesty, sometimes they feel themselves not free or accepted or safe enough to share the real thing, why they behave like they do, or what they think about their expectations, or what their needs are. So there needs to be some safety for them to really talk about that.
So it's almost like, okay, it's good to have these conversations when you are welcoming in new staff and try to set expectations. But it sounds like what you're saying is that it's also good to kind of check in again, like maybe every 6 months or every 3 months, as you build trust and build relationship, to be like, okay, hey, how are we doing with our expectations?
Yeah, and it's also not that we have to adjust all our communication to Gen Z. I mean, they need to adjust as well to, because we are intergenerational. We have a lot of generations. So all of us somehow, some way, sometime have to communicate in a way that is not our preferred way of communication. But that means for all of us, also for Gen Z. If you're using emails, or you make notes and minutes, you have to somehow educate them to make sure that they look in the minutes before they come to the meeting. If that is what you want, your minutes are not only a backup. You can say, okay, I want that before you come to the meeting, minutes are not too long. I mean, that's obviously would be the best, because they don't like long minutes. They say, okay, the evening before or 1 hour before, you go through the minutes, or the day before, because maybe there are to-do things that you put in the minutes. And if they have the meeting and they go away, they think about all other things. Next week they come and they've never looked at the to-do things that are in the minutes, so it's not done. And so that you have to educate them, maybe even help them, okay, this is your agenda for the week, and on that day, 1 hour you put in, okay, look at my to-do list, look at the minutes, things like that. Just help them to also get rhythms in their schedules. Yeah. Especially those that have not done like a higher education or have worked in a profession. You really need to know they come from high school, they haven't had any training in this, so they really do need some coaching to develop, because otherwise they are just doing what they think it's right. But if nobody's telling them, and they know they are not doing it right, but then yeah, you have to help them to how to develop actually working skills, and maybe more intentionally than just assume it will happen or they will develop that. Yeah. I think it's time to go to the break, unless there's one more example someone wants to share or question. Otherwise we'll...
I just have a remark. It feels like double communication. Before, communication happened like maybe by email or in a certain way, but now it feels like a lot of time to send an email, to do a WhatsApp, and some people would like a sentence a day. So it feels a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah. I think it is what you're saying. It is almost, yeah, I think it's reality, especially if you have a lot of young people at your location, that, yeah, their style of communication is short and clear, and they won't read through a long email to get all the details out of there. And they will see this email coming in, it's long, they won't even probably start to read. So if you want them to do that, you have to educate them, because otherwise it's reality that they won't do it. Yeah, Carl says effective communication 7 times 7 ways. Yeah.
Also, I mean, including all the generations to make sure that everybody gets the message.
Yeah.
That's what it's a lot. It feels like it's a lot of it's more work than before.
I think that's true, because through technology the generations are changing, and the younger generations are embracing new communication technologies, and they stick to that. And so you have all different ways of technology and different ways of communicating. Yeah. So I do think it is, you have a point there. Yeah. And it's good to talk about that in your team. If it's too much, what could we as a team talk about? How do we communicate, and do we all then agree to that? And so that is interesting. But the younger generation, I think a text that's really, really helpful for them.
Yeah. Angelique, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, maybe at the end, I'm sure you do that, that you give us, so for instance, 5 ways that the baby boomers need to sort of step up, 5 ways that the X needs to step up, something. Do you have something like that?
I'll go a little bit more into overall communication and what is important. Yeah, I don't know if it's really the 5 steps for each generation, but that was what I showed in the beginning, what those generations think is important. And as you know, what each generation finds very important. So it will be in the slides when you receive the PowerPoint.
Yeah. So I thought maybe at the end you would have something like that, but okay, then I can do it myself, because it's quite good to just go away in your head with it. And
it's interesting that Gen Z prefers for a lot of things, again, the face-to-face communication, with the millennials rather not, and then baby boomers did. So that is something that is also changing. And it's just good to be aware of it, and then talk in the teams and see where are the differences, because sometimes we assume things and we don't talk about it, and it's important to talk about it and create the awareness that is actually the meaning today.
Thank you.
Yes, so let's have a 15-minute break. Yes. So we'll see how to communicate well and how to bridge the gap and in communication. And when we look at communication, it's good to know that effective communication is about more than just exchanging information. It's about understanding the emotion and intentions behind the information. So it's not about only throwing information out there, but there's something behind the information, the meaning, the emotion, intention behind the information, as well as being able to clearly convey a message. So that is really important to know it, and that is what communication, I think, is all about. When we look to communication, you probably have heard about communication noise. And communication noise, that refers to all influences that are there, the influence effective communication. They influence in a negative way the interpretation of communication, and it refers to anything that interferes with the communication process between a speaker and an audience. And there can be a lot of reasons for noise. There can be a lot of examples for noise as well. And I'm just wondering, stop sharing the screen, and I'm wondering if you can put in the chat some things that, to your understanding, can cause noise in the conversation. That you say, okay, this is a reason for noise in our conversation with other generations or within my team. What are things that could be potential communication noise? Just put out some things out in the chat. Cultural differences, yeah, for sure. Language barriers. They always read text messages and look at their phone during everything. Emotional triggers by something we perceived but was not actually said. Yeah. Past experiences, yes. Previous miscommunication. Not aware of certain triggers of yourself or the other. Yeah. And what you said, Carl, that about the phones, sometimes it's also good to talk about phones. If you want them to have the phones during your meetings or not. And it is hard because, we're all very much attached to our phones. And but it's also a great source of causing noise in communication, and also during meetings, even sometimes during prayer times. People, of course, they have the Bible on their phone, so they want to look and go through scripture maybe, but it's also messages coming in at the same time. So it is good to somehow talk also on, what do we do with our phones? Do we have them on during a meeting? Do we have them off sometimes? Do we have them not in our pocket when you feel them when a message is coming in? Or do we have them on a table somewhere? Just to talk about it, to have the conversation, because it is disturbing and distracting a lot. Being distracted by what is happening outside, especially in Amsterdam, probably with sirens going on, and I don't know if you saw the news, the hostage taken yesterday evening, which was a big thing happening close, well, not so close to where you live, I think, Annemieke, but it was in the center of Amsterdam. But there's a lot of outside noise, Things that are going on in private life, family, yes, for sure. Yeah. Busy thinking about to say when they are done talking, not really listening, Windstorms, I think being tired, when you're tired, you communicate also in a different way than when you have a lot of energy. And you then tend to forget some things. Psychological high stress, blanking out, small children screaming, fighting. So there could be a lot of potential noise in our communication. And especially, it depends on which what is the reason for meeting up or for communication. With some talks, you might really consider that you prepare a conversation really well. If you want to have a one-on-one conversation with some person and you want to talk about serious matters, it is good to take that serious and take time to also prepare it well. So what is this person What is the preferred maybe communication style? Make sure that you have a nice place and that is a less distractions as possible. Make sure that you know where you will be talking about, that you know, okay, do we have 1 hour? Do we have 1.5 hour? Sometimes time is also a noise because you are under time pressure. You want to talk about something serious, but you know you have only like 15 minutes and you want to do it really fast, and then it's maybe even hurting the other person, or you don't have the peace inside of you. So that is also important to know, what am I going to share? What's the reason for the communication? Too many sources of input, hard to keep track of who said what and where. Yeah, that's especially the digital communication. I find it hard to keep up. Sometimes I just receive a message and I think, where did it come in on my phone? Is it on like the workplace? Is it a messenger? Is it a WhatsApp? Or where did it come? And checking all these different, or was it an email? Yeah. So that is true. You have so many sources where you have to check who is communicating with you through which source. And that's also something you can in your team maybe talk about, but that's all potential. Yeah, all potential noises. Yeah, let me share my screen. Yeah, I'll go with you just through some basic actually communicating skills that are important, and they are actually equally important for every generation, but it's important to be just reminded of the importance of it, and to be a good communicator and to grow more into communication. And I think the first very, very important thing is listening, and really listening. So being a good listener is one of the best ways to be a good communicator. And it's so often that you standing and you drinking coffee and a person is sharing with you, but there's another person walking there and another person there. And sometimes you can even follow kind of two conversations at the same time, but not really paying attention and listening. And that is also because there's a lot of communication happening in the informal, but also in informal, it's good to be aware that if a person is sharing something with you, that it is honoring to be a good listener then as well. So good listening is so important. And active listening involves paying attention to what the other person is saying, sometimes even asking, clarifying questions, not only yeah, but asking, okay, what do you mean with it? Why was this hurtful for you? Well, that you just ask some more questions to go also to a deeper level of communication. If you want to go to a deeper level of communication or to the root of a problem, it is important to ask questions. Although a lot of you are from member care, so probably you know this already, but active listening gives you a greater understanding what a person is trying to say, and then you can also respond appropriately. So if you are not so good a listener, some of us are good listeners, others are more talkative. So we rather take over the conversation very fast or very quickly instead of listening. So then it's good to be aware that it's so good to start to develop your listening skills. Non-verbal communication is also important. The eye contact, but you can also see hand gestures, the tone, the color of the message. There's so much happening in between, and a relaxed and open stance or very tense person, that says a lot. If you observe that really well, it says a lot about how this person is in the communication. And also for yourself, be aware of your own like non-verbal communication. What are you communicating towards another person? And it's good to pay attention to that as well, to the nonverbal communication. And what are you communicating with your nonverbal gestures towards the person that you're communicating to, or towards the team that you're communicating to? Are you paying attention eagerly to each team member, or are you forgetting a team member? All these things are really, really important. Then another one is clarity and concision. And good communication means saying just enough. So you don't talk too much and you don't talk too little. And I think that is some in between of all the generations. Like the older generation tend to talking a lot, the younger generation tend to keep it really short. So try to find the balance in when you go into discussions, but also the length of the meetings, that it's not like endless meetings when you talk a lot about social things, which are important. But if it's part of your meetings, then your meetings are pretty long. So it would be better to, okay, this is the set time for a meeting. And afterwards, there's time to have some coffee. So do some informal things so that, especially for Gen Zs, the millennials, they know, okay, this is the meeting. Now we concentrate. Then we talk about the topics. And afterwards, it's like the social part of the meeting. Sometimes within YWAM, it's so much mixed, like the social and the meetings and the business meetings. And then it tends to be long meetings with a lot of talking in between. So it's good to keep that in mind and try to convey your message in as few words as possible. So yet you give details and yet you talk about it, but you try to keep it as short as possible, especially for the younger generation, so they know that everything actually you say is important. And there's not a lot of like words added to it, but it's a few words as possible, so that what you want to say is clearly and is directly. And whether you're speaking to someone in person or that it is in the phone, but also in the email, especially to the younger generation, if you do want to communicate by email, try to keep it as short as possible. That's what they really appreciate. And for some people, it's really difficult to make short emails or short documents. And for others, they really like to do it short. But I would want to encourage you just to keep it as short as possible. Because if you just ramble on, your listener will either tune out or just is not sure what you want to communicate and what is important in what you are communicating. So think about it before you're saying. So be prepared. What do you want to say? And that will help you. And it's also easier to do. And of course, friendliness. And I already talked about friendliness when we talked about the fruit of the Spirit. Friendliness is so important. Through a friendly tone, through a personal question, or simply through a smile, then you will encourage the other person to feel at ease, but also engage in open and honest communication with you. And sometimes you just have to create some sense of safety, and there has to be some relationship established before you can talk about some topics. But then it's also important to have this friendliness, because that will help. And it's important to always actually be nice and polite in all your communication, also in email communication. Even when you're upset or whatever, just try to be as polite and as friendly as possible. And of course, in face-to-face communication as well. When you can, personalize your emails. You can do it at the start of an email, because if you only send like emails to a group, and sometimes people feel the email is less important. But if you personalize it, it's very helpful. And you can even do that with questions they send. Just personalize and make them feel appreciated. When I worked as a teacher, I received so many emails from students and all different questions and whatever. And I trained myself to always start the reply of my email with something personal or with a compliment towards the student for something that I noticed in the past few weeks, and always added something personal into that. And I think that is very, very important. It helps to establish relationship. And if you have good relationships, then communication flows so much better. Confidence. It's important to also be confident in your interaction with others. If you feel very insecure with another generation in your team, and you don't feel equipped or so, then they feel it, so it hinders. It can become like a noise in the communication. So try to be confident. It's important to be confident in your interaction. And confidence shows your team members and others that you believe in what you're saying. And also be confident about what you want to share and what you want to say. That you kind of own it, and that you are behind what you're sharing, that you are motivated to share it, that you know the value of what you're sharing. And sometimes it's hard if you have to share a message from like a base leader says you have to share this message to your team, and you're not really sure that you want to share it, so you bring it a little hesitant, and that's what your team will immediately feel. So it's good to think about that what you share, how you communicate, that you have somehow confidence in what you do. And if you have to share things that you don't feel comfortable with, either ask another person to come and share in your team, or wrestle through it yourself. So until you know, okay, I know why I have to share this. That's important. But also, yeah, always listen and empathize with the other person. And that comes to empathy is so important. Even when you disagree with a person, even if you have a conversation, you have to correct someone. I was surprised, Annemieke, when you shared, like, okay, the team said, send me a message, and then if I don't do it, what will be the consequences? And okay, that's not so difficult to send, okay, if you don't do this is the consequences. But then the next conversation, if you do have to start talking about the consequences, that would probably be the more uncomfortable conversation, unless you have really talked it through with that person. Okay, how are we going to do this? You ask for consequences. What would be possible good consequences, and how do we then talk about these consequences? Because that is probably a different conversation if you have to do that. But even if you disagree with a person in a conversation or in communicating, always have empathy for the person. I think the love that I shared earlier is so important, to carry love for people in our heart when we communicate. If we are irritated or we don't like a person, they can immediately feel that, and it's just like a noise in our communication. So that is important to show that to the persons. Respect is also important in conversations, which could be really nice. I want to encourage you to do that in your team. If you have multiple generations in your team, just spend some time talking about, what does respect mean for you? What does respect mean for your generation? What does respect mean for my generation? Because it's cultural. We were talking about it with when you were in the breakout rooms, the first session with the three of us behind, we're talking about respect. It's so culturally respect, and it's also generational difference respect. And we sometimes assume when we talk about respect that we all know what we're talking about, but often it's not. So I had one time a student, and he was screaming at me, and I said that I didn't like it and I didn't feel respected. And then he said, but I do respect you. But I said, well, that's a really different way how you respect if you still scream on a teacher and you are really verbally aggressive. And he thought he was still respecting me. So we had quite some discussion about what was respect all about. And it's interesting to just talk about this one word, which can have so many different interpretations. But it's good for yourself that you know, okay, I'll communicate in a respectful way. Feedback, I'll come back to that later, but it is good to be able to appropriately give feedback, but also to receive feedback. And sometimes, I won't say sometimes, it's always helpful to ask your team or to ask another person to give you feedback on, for example, leading the meeting, or give feedback on how you're communicating. Just ask for feedback and see what you get. And often when we receive feedback, the first thing is we want to start to defend ourselves. Oh, that is because this. Oh, that is because that. But just listen, just receive the feedback and just listen and think, okay, I have the attitude, and how you say it, that when I hear feedback, that I think always, maybe it's not everything is right, but there's always something in the feedback that the person notices that must be true. So how can I change that? Or how can I then improve something or do something different so that I grow in a certain skill or specific skill or whatever? Always like to ask for the feedback. And as a teacher, we were forced to ask feedback so many times, and feedback was sent to our managers, and they would interview students about how we were as a teacher, how we were as a person, how we were as a mentor several times a year, and they would go report to the manager, and they would go report to us as teachers, and then we have to change certain things about the lessons. After like 8 weeks, we would send survey to all the students and then hear how you had done like the semester. And so this constant feedback and improving. So that's something I was so much used to do that. And giving feedback involves giving praise as well. Something simple as good job or thanks for taking care of that. It's just also like small feedback. It is like, I see you and I hear you, and that is so important, and people want to be seen. And I think that is from all generations. So how to better communicate between generations? It is actually the right message, then the right audience. So you know, who is my audience? Who am I communicating to? And then is it the right time? So what is sometimes the timing on how to send, to communicate? What is a good time? The right tactics. So what are you using? What for this person, for this group, what would be the right way to communicate it? Is it an email? Is it a text message? Is it a phone call when you want to call like more the baby boomers? So what is the right tactic what is the right method to choose to achieve your goal? Because it's actually about, you want to achieve something with your communication. So what are the right tools? What is the right time? What is your audience? And how can you, as best as possible, communicate with them? Well, how to improve it? Gain generational awareness. And I think that's why this seminar is all about. Like yesterday, we talked about the different generation. As you have more generational awareness about the different generation, then you already start to change probably the way you communicate with them, because you know more on what is their strength, what is their weaknesses, how do they like to be approached, how is their work ethic, how do they work in teams, how do they approach life. So you know more about them. So that is important. And that's actually why you were in this seminar, and you're starting with that. And each generation has specific communication preferences. And knowing that is the start. I think that is important. And if you have a meeting with baby boomers, that will probably call for a more formal tone. And when you have all Gen Zers, then it would be more relaxed, more informal. You would probably also use different words for that group that you will run into and that you will communicate to. But don't forget to individualize as well, because not everybody lives up to the generational stereotype. So that is good to know as well. What I said, sometimes you are at the edge of generation, and sometimes you are totally different than your generation is. So it is always good to see the person and not like generalize everything, but also individualize and understand the best communication style for that specific person. That is important not to forget. Well, set expectations regarding team culture and behavior. If everyone knows what is expected of them, if everybody knows How do we communicate together? Everybody knows, okay, this tone do we use? This is how we communicate. We do respect each other. Just some communication rules will be very, very helpful. Or this is, we do use our WhatsApp group, or we do use another group, or we do use email, but set expectations and talk about it. And that prevents also disappointments, or it prevents disappointments as a person or as a team. So just communicate with your team. How do we want to communicate as a team? What works for us? What works best? And maybe it's for 2 or 3 is out of their comfort zone, and for others not, but that's something that you can talk about together. Use different types of communication. That's what we were talking about already, what I heard. Okay, we have to use different types. Yeah, sometimes you have to do and an email and a text message to just make sure that you reach all the different generations within your communication. And so it's good to have different communication platforms. Sometimes you use, it depends if it's for your team or that it's for public relations. Then it's good to be on maybe different platforms. So you share it on social media, on Facebook, but you also do share it on Instagram, for example, or on other social media platforms. Depends which group you want to reach with your communication. So it's good to use different types of communication. And some people like some communication channels, but as example, if you want to have a disciplinary conversation with a person, yes, you should always do that face to face. You can't do that by a text message. I mean, that would never be a good way to just send some comments or feedback, like feedback things that you want them to change or to improve. Don't do that by sending them a text message, but make sure that you do that in a one-on-one conversation, and preferable face-to-face in like being present, but otherwise it could also be like the time we had in COVID, that it's through a Zoom, but that would also be, that always has to be in a personal conversation. So that is important that you do that. Personalize your approach. As I said, as a teacher, I always try to, when I communicated with students by email, to start with a compliment, but also because I taught so many students, I always try to remember something personal from a student. So for some, I knew that one of their parents lost a job, so I would ask a week later, I would ask, how's with your dad? Did he find a job already? Or there was someone sick in the family, I would ask about that. So that always has to do with building relationships. And it is good to, when you have people in your team, or even new on your base location, if there's new people entering your location, your base, just make conversation with them and try to remember something on a personal level that later, maybe 2 weeks later, 1 week later, you can just ask about that specific thing. And if you try to make that a habit, people appreciate it, because they feel that they are important. They feel that you see them. They feel that you matter to them. So it's always important to, in any communication, to personalize it and to remember something of the person, and you can later ask about. And if you hear something important and someone shares with you something, especially I think a lot of young people who are serving in another country, and sometimes something happens and with a family and they're far away and they share it, it is so important to, in 1 or 2 days, just to go back to them and ask, how is this happening? How is it with your family? Are things changing already? Then we easily forget it. They share it with us, but then we easily forget. But it's so important if they share it, and that it's encouraging for them as well, that they know that you see it, that they struggle, and that you don't forget it. So it's always important to have a personal approach, but also don't forget the person. Understand differences in values and motivation. Yesterday we went through the different generations, and each different generation has different values in life, has different motivations in life. And when you are from the rebuilding generation post World War II, or you Gen Z and you're only talking about environment, there's different values and different motivations. And it's good to understand those, to be aware of those. It doesn't say that you have to totally agree in it, but it's good that you understand it. And it's also good to know what is motivating you. What motivates the person to be in your team? And sometimes you know, oh yeah, they said this is my motivation, or that is my motivation, and that's probably how they apply to be in your team or on your location. But take some time to go a little bit deeper. What is really their drive? What is really the motivation behind? And it is so interesting to just know that and understand that. What is really driving them, and that will make them thrive as well if you can put some emphasis on that. So are you aware actually of each team member, of each person that you work with closely? What is their deepest motivation? Why they are doing what they are doing? And it might be that you find out different values or different motivations and you're still in the same team. That's no problem. Just take some time to really talk that through in your teams. The next one is very, very important. Ask. Don't assume. We sometimes assume that people understood. We assume that they know this is how we communicate together. We assume, but you don't know unless you ask. So it is good to ask and not assume. And that's the thing with Generation Z. I often say they don't read between the lines. They need really clear instructions. This is what I want you to do. That is what you want you to do. And sometimes you don't communicate it that clear. You communicate in a certain way and you assume that they understand, and they could have understood if they have read between the lines, but you gave somehow that message, but not very directly. And that is something with Generation Z, then they don't get it. You have to be really clear. So ask and don't assume. I think that is really something important. But also the other way around for younger generations, they sometimes assume that you understand them. I one time gave this teaching on Generation Z to a lot of Generation Zs, and they said, oh, is this so special about our generation? I thought everybody was like this. So they were not even aware that how their generation is different from previous generations, and maybe previous generations are more aware of that. So it is both ways around. Remove barriers to communication. You can talk about in your teams, what are barriers that we are experiencing in our communication? How can we solve that? Is that a generational one, or is that could be also, though we saw like previous hurt, it could be cultural, could be all kind of reasons. But yeah, try to remove barriers in to communication. Be willing to teach and be taught. Teach and learn. And one of the keys to better intergenerational communicate is a willingness to teach and to learn, because all generations differ in their preferences, and there will come a time when we all will have to use a less familiar method in communication, and that's for all. That's not that all the generation have to adjust to the younger generation, but also the younger generation to watch it. Also, we all, if we are in an intergenerational settings, we all have to adjust our ways of communication one time or another time. So it's about learning, teaching, and also being taught how to use less familiar communication methods. Acknowledge the differences. We are different. And we don't want to be all the same. there's a uniqueness in each generation, and next generation, Generation Alpha, will be different again. And that's okay, that's fine. We're all different. We grow up in a different timing, and just acknowledge the differences and don't give a value that this is better than that. No, it's equally, every generation is equally valuable, but we are different, and that's not a problem unless we make it a problem. But let's talk about it. That is important. So acknowledge the differences. Be an engaged listener. I think I shared that already. Express yourself. Communication is about also expressing yourself. If you're irritated, or if you think, oh, I'm frustrated that you don't understand me, they can feel it. You can say, it frustrates me that it seems that I'm not able to communicate in the right way, and you can express it. That is something that you can do. Pay attention to nonverbal signs. I think I said that already. Control your emotions. Yeah. Make intentional language choices. I think that one is important. The words we choose to speak can have a great impact on our message. So it is important to sometimes intentionally choose the words or the language, and because words can have a lot of power. And if you know the words you're using and you speak, you have influence on them. So that is good. And in Proverbs 25:11, it says, like apples of gold in settings of silver is ruling rightly given. In Dutch, it says a little bit different. I really like the Dutch. It says the right word at the right time is like a golden apple on a silver platter. And I think that is so well spoken. The right word at the right time is like a golden apple on a silver platter. There's so much about words and communication in the Bible. And it's so important to be aware of our communication. Let's see. Yeah, go to feedback. And yes, I'll stop sharing this screen. I'll share another screen. I'm just wondering if you think about feedback, what comes to your mind? What is the first thing that comes to your mind? And you can fill it in on this Menti. It's a Menti again, but with a different code. Opportunity to grow. Yes, that's a nice one. Critical. Honest, positive. Solution-based. Solution-based. That's what is, yeah. Solution-based. It's nobody that put in, when I think about feedback, I think, oh no. Someone did. Yeah, someone outside. What did I do wrong? Not many are receptive. Yeah. Another view. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. Go back to my PowerPoint. The thing is with feedback, if you're not used to have a culture of feedback, then people are shocked if you start with giving feedback. And if there's a culture of feedback, then it's really helpful, and it is good to create that culture of feedback. I think we did this one, and this is the difference when you look to the generations on feedback. Then you see that the baby boomers don't appreciate feedback. Then Gen X will ask for feedback, but maybe not so often. They are kind of used to have feedback, receive feedback, but they can ask for it, but maybe they're not always so open to it. Millennials say, I want feedback whenever I ask for it, which will be frequently. And not only feedback that they can learn from, but also feedback did you see what I do? Is it okay what I did? Things like that. And then Generation Z, they like constructive feedback, and they expect multiple touch points with their supervisors, weekly or even daily. It's almost like at the end of the day, hearing, yes, I did it right, what can I improve? Just small bite pieces of feedback. So this is not like, okay, let's sit down, like a weekly review or something, but just like a 1 minute feedback, very short, but for them it is important to have like this short moment of feedback. So it's actually an increasing longing for feedback, but not only like the negative, like what we used to have, like a yearly report of what you sell in the workplace. That's also changing actually. I'll give you show you a video on someone who expressed it really well. Let's share this one and see, start the video. I was somehow surprised how he shared that if they don't get feedback, that they leave companies. And it's like, okay, we are losing some of our Gen Zs pretty fast within YWAM at the moment. And I know there's multiple things. We'll come back on that tomorrow. Like they have difficulty with commitment and things like that. But how good are we in giving them feedback and helping them to grow and develop? Is that something that is really valuable for them? And that is something that we might sometimes be lacking in providing. So something just to think about that, because if it is that so many are leaving the workplace with lack of feedback, could that be one of the reasons that some of the Gen Zs drop out very, very soon out of YWAM? We'll go into breakout rooms, and I will post the question in question in the chat so that you can talk about the question. I will tell you the question as well. So the question is, what can you practically do to better communicate between the generations? So really talk in groups for 15 minutes. And can you come up with ideas for improving communication? You've heard a lot. So what could be ideas to improve, and what could you practically do? So what could be like a step you could take next week, or next time you meet with your team or on your location, or with a certain person from another generation? What could you practically do, improve to make the communication better? Well, welcome back. And I'm curious, what are solutions on intergenerational communication you've talked about? So could you please put up some in the chat, and maybe someone of you wants to share as well about your breakout room, what you've been thinking, what ideas came up, how to improve communication.
I think just underlining the importance of asking, not assuming, and asking your team what their expectations are and different things. And I think it's something that we so often can overlook. We think we just need to have some sort of, XYZ 1, 2, 3 steps and we'll fix it. But actually to engage with people and ask them for solutions as well, and say, like, how can we solve this together, instead of just, as a leader or as a person trying to figure it out or find the magic formula, actually asking.
Yeah. Solution-based feedback. Yeah. Explain why certain things are important to me and ask what is important to others. Yeah, that is really good. Knowing there can be difficulties and differences is a good start. Discuss together. Yeah. The awareness of the differences, that is important. That's where this seminar is all about. since Gen Z can't read between the lines, to make sure you have explained and asked, do you understand? Yeah. And even if you ask, do you understand, they will probably say yes. But you can ask a little bit more, okay, can not really, these words, can you repeat me? But something like that, like ask them to restate a little bit. So that they restate it a bit, because it's, if you ask, do you understand me? It's also when you are with intercultural communication. I work a lot with Dutch second languages. And if I would ask, do you understand me? They would say yes. And I'm sure I know they didn't understand me, but it's polite to say yes. So the restatement is good. Ask them 3-point feedback. Yeah. It's also good to ask feedback from Gen Zers and then let them give feedback so they know you are not afraid for feedback, and then to see what you can learn from that. And then not come with feedback towards them immediately, but just build this by being vulnerable yourself, receiving feedback, create this atmosphere of feedback, and then of course give feedback to them as well. We've asked how they prefer to communicate and create some basic expectations. Yeah, regarding also for them to share back what they've been heard. Yeah, very great. Yeah, some really good things. Talk about generational differences. Yeah, but then also look to what the Bible says about certain topics. Yes, that we are not led by our generational cultural preference, but by God. Yeah, that's really, really important. I'm coming back on that tomorrow as well. Yeah, that's really good. Well, I hope this was helpful.
I have a short question because my experience is that people want feedback, but they often want encouragement and affirmation, and that especially the younger generation. But do they really want constructive feedback? Is that your experience, that they really want that, or is it just a need of being affirmed and seen by elderly people?
I do think it's a combination of both. They really want to be encouraged because they want to do it really well. So that if you don't give feedback, they become insecure. Am I doing it well? Like previous generations thought, when I don't hear anything, I'm doing it well. But they are more like insecure. So they want to be somehow confirmed. Yeah, you're doing it well. I see you doing it. And then but they also want to grow and develop. That is their desire. So if you give, but you have to give it in pieces. So it's not like 15 minutes, but like the 1 minute, 2 minutes. But I do see, so it's more like, okay, you've done a great job here. Oh, I see you struggle with that. Can I help you to improve it? Maybe if you read this article or you watch this YouTube, that way. That's how I'll also the video explain it. Oh, I'll put the link in the chat to that video. And so it is, they want constructive feedback, but that is helpful for them that you also somehow connect something that they can use to improve it. So it's not like, okay, you've done, you messed up this, and then they go home and they don't know, and now what am I doing? How am I going to improve it? But I think for every feedback that is constructive for them to develop something or to change something, there needs to be some kind of trust or a talk about, yeah. But if you see them struggle with things, then you can go, I see you struggle with this. And especially when they're just entering YWAM or they're new, they want to learn. And it's good to talk about that. Yeah. But they can be defensive as well. But that's how a lot of us, our personal reaction is, immediate reaction to defend ourselves, but they will appreciate it. Yeah.
But I think because they are so relational, and that needs to be the basis, this guy said, the relationships. And so that I think we in YWAM have a challenge then in how we do leadership, because that's a huge need. If we want to build relationship with Generation C, that takes a lot of time, and some of our YWAM leaders, we are quite busy. So how do we then lead in kind of Generation C? That's a huge topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially maybe it could be the team leader, but it needs a different approach because they are easily stopping or going to another place or not fulfilling their commitment, and so they have different loyalty, and yeah. But we'll talk about that a bit more tomorrow. Then you come to the discipleship and the need of the Gen Z and how they can thrive within YWAM. Yes, so back to you, Boodle.
Thank you very much. It was very good and interesting again. So tomorrow, same time, same place, and we will hear more about Gen Z. So yeah, thank you to all of you for your time, and yeah, see you tomorrow. Have a good and blessed day.